Hello, and welcome to Plotfall. Our focus this evening rests on the story of how medieval peasants survived the coldest nights. Before we begin, if you find value in these stories, perhaps take a quiet moment to like the video and subscribe. It helps others find the channel. You can also let me know in the comments where you're listening from and the time. It's always fascinating to see our quiet community grow around the world. Now, find a comfortable position. Perhaps dim the lights or turn on a soft fan for background noise, and let's ease into tonight's story together. The light begins to fail now, the sun bleeding its last warmth across a vast, indifferent sky. Imagine those colors. Not the crisp, clear sunsets we often see, but a bruised purple and a fading, almost reluctant orange, smudged by the ever-present wood smoke that hangs low over the village. The air, which moments ago held the faint scent of damp earth and distant livestock, now carries a sharper, colder bite. You can feel it on your cheeks, a subtle promise of the deeper chill to come. Inside a peasant's hut, the shadows are already thick. Light is a precious commodity, and as dusk deepens, the single smoky tallow candle or the flickering flames of the central hearth cast dancing, elongated figures on the rough-hewn wooden walls. Gaps in the wattle and daub construction, hastily plugged with moss or rags, now seem to sigh with the incoming drafts. Listen closely, and you might hear the wind whispering its mournful tune, a constant companion through the long, dark months. The family huddles, a knot of shared warmth against the creeping cold. The day's labor, heavy and unending, is done, but the true test begins as night descends. Their clothes, coarse wool and linen, offer some protection, but the dampness from the earthen floor seems to seep into everything, into their very bones. The smell of wood smoke is pervasive, clinging to hair and fabric, a scent that means both meager warmth and the stinging discomfort of an often poorly ventilated space. This isn't just about being cold. It's about a persistent, gnawing discomfort that settles in with the fading light, a nightly siege against the elements with only the most basic defenses. And with each passing day, a subtle shift makes itself known. You might step outside your low doorway for a moment, perhaps to check on the meager woodpile, and feel it instantly. A distinct crispness in the air. It's no longer the heavy, humid warmth of summer, nor yet the biting frost of deep winter, but something in between. A clean, sharp quality that bites gently at your exposed skin, carrying the faint, earthy scent of fallen leaves and damp soil, a quiet herald of the change. This chill isn't just a feeling, it's a message. The sun, already lower in the sky, seems to hurry towards the horizon, painting the bruised twilight sky in fleeting colors before surrendering to an ever earlier night. Each evening, the precious daylight recedes a little more, a slow, inevitable theft. You notice how the shadows lengthen sooner, stretching long, distorted fingers across the rutted trackways and barren fields. The chirping of crickets, so persistent in summer, grows fainter, replaced by a deeper, more resonant quiet, broken only by the mournful hoot of an owl or the rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth. This growing darkness isn't just an absence of light, it's a presence. It blankets the world, muffling sounds, and brings with it a profound stillness. The long, dark nights of winter are no longer a distant thought but a tangible promise, whispered on the cooling breeze. Inside the hut, the small fire, precious as it is, casts dancing shadows that make the corners of your small world seem even deeper, even more unknown, as you prepare for the quiet, cold hours ahead. Before the rough-hewn door is fully barred against the deepening night, you might linger for a moment, a silhouette framed against the dim glow from within. Your gaze drifts out, across the fields. They lie shorn and silent now, the vibrant greens and golds of summer and early autumn, just a fading memory. Only stubble remains, poking through the thin, hard soil like the weary bristles on an old, familiar face. A cold, sharp wind, carrying the scent of damp earth and perhaps the faintest hint of distant snow, snakes its way through the gaps in your worn tunic, a stark reminder of what's to come. There is a quiet understanding that settles upon you, as undeniable as the fading light. It's not a sudden fear, but a slow, heavy knowledge that the brief season of warmth, of relative plenty, is truly over. The urgent activity of harvest, The gathering of every last precious stalk and root is done. What's stored is stored. What's mended is mended, or will have to endure as it is. There is a certain, almost stark finality to this moment. The earth has given what it will, and now it prepares to sleep, and you must survive its slumber with whatever you have managed to hoard. The long, slow test of winter has truly begun, and your small, flickering fire feels like a fragile ally against the encroaching chill. And as that fire crackles, a small, defiant sound against the growing silence of the night, a different kind of chill might begin to creep into the dim corners of your small home. It's not just the icy fingers of the wind probing at the gaps in the wattle and daub walls, though that is a constant, unwelcome companion, making the rushes on the floor feel damp beneath your feet. No, this is a deeper, quieter unease, a low thrumming beneath the surface of your thoughts, as persistent as the drip of melting icicles from the thatch. Your eyes might drift to the precious pile of firewood stacked in the corner, already looking smaller than you'd like, each piece a testament to an exhausting, back-aching day of gathering, perhaps even a risky foray into the Lord's woods. You wonder with a familiar pang, if it will truly be enough to see you through until the first thaws. Will the forest yield more when this runs low, or will the snows lie too deep, locking away even the meanest scraps of kindling? Then there's the food. The sacks of grain, the precious store of dried peas, the carefully guarded flitch of salted meat, if you were fortunate enough to have one. It all seemed so much when first stored, a comforting bulwark against the lean months to come, a small victory in itself. But now, with the full weight of winter pressing down, stretching out like an endless dark road, each portion taken feels like a weighty decision. You might find yourself mentally calculating, rationing not just for yourself, but for the children huddled close, their small bodies radiating a fleeting warmth, and for the older members of the family whose coughs seem to linger a little longer in the damp, smoky air. Their small, trusting faces, flickering in the unsteady firelight, are a constant, gentle reminder of what's truly at stake. It's not a dramatic fear, not yet, but a quiet, persistent worry, an uninvited guest sharing your meager warmth. Beyond the immediate concern of the evening meal, the rhythm of late autumn pulsed with a quiet, almost sacred urgency. The days, though visibly shortening, were still precious, each hour a fleeting opportunity to bolster defenses against the inevitable, creeping cold. Picture yourself, as the low sun casts long, golden amber shadows, walking towards the skeletal outline of the nearby woods. The air is crisp, perhaps carrying the first hint of frost alongside the rich, earthy scent of decaying leaves and damp soil. Your hands, already calloused and perhaps a little chapped, grip the worn, smooth handle of an axe, ready for the rhythmic thud against timber, a sound that echoes the steady, determined beat of preparation. Every fallen branch, every suitable log, is a small victory, carried back to a growing woodpile that stands as a defiant, if modest, bulwark against winter's icy breath. Back at your small, dim dwelling, other essential tasks called. Perhaps you're carefully mending the wattle and daub walls, pushing a sticky mixture of mud, straw, and animal dung into the insidious cracks that Jack Frost would otherwise gleefully exploit. The smell is undeniably pungent, deeply earthy, but it's the aroma of survival, of sealing your small, smoky haven against the coming onslaught. Any remaining harvest, meager as it might be, a few hearty root vegetables perhaps, is carefully stowed away, maybe in a shallow, cool pit dug beneath the earthen floorboards, hoping to keep it from both frost and the relentless tiny teeth of hungry rodents. The last of the foraged herbs are hung to dry from the soot-stained rafters, their faint, lingering fragrance a ghostly reminder of summer's fleeting warmth. It's a gentle, relentless hum of activity, each small, deliberate act, a crucial thread woven into the sparse tapestry of winter survival, a quiet prayer against the dark. As twilight deepens, painting the vast, cold sky in bruised purples and fading grays, your gaze might settle upon the peasant hovel. It's a steadfast silhouette, isn't it? A squat, hunched shape against the encroaching darkness, seeming almost to grow from the earth rather than being built upon it. Often, this bastion against the bitter night is just a single cramped room. Its walls fashioned from a lattice of pliable wood, the wattle packed tight with daub. A sticky, hopeful mixture of clay, mud, and perhaps straw or animal dung. Above, a thick, shaggy thatch of reeds or straw forms the roof, a haven for countless unseen scurrying creatures, and a porous shield against the worst of the sleet and snow. Best effort is perhaps the kindest description for its weatherproofing. The wind, a persistent and unwelcome guest, will inevitably find its way through myriad tiny chinks and gaps in those earthen walls, sighing its cold promises of the long, dark hours ahead. Step inside, into the gloom. The air grows heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth from the floor beneath your feet, the lingering ghost of wood smoke from a meager, carefully tended fire, and the close, musky aroma of any livestock, perhaps a precious cow or a few hardy sheep, brought in. They share this space not just for their own survival, but because their very bodies offer a faint, living warmth, a small comfort against the pervasive chill. Light is a true luxury. Perhaps a single, sputtering tallow candle casts more shadow than illumination, making the familiar corners of this smoky box leap and twist in the uncertain flicker. This humble, shared space is the fragile front line in the nightly battle against a world seemingly determined to freeze its inhabitants solid. Now, draw a slow breath, if you dare, within these walls. The air itself is a thick tapestry, woven from threads of acrid wood smoke, clinging stubbornly from the central hearth. A hearth that often seems as keen to fill the hut with soot as it is to offer warmth. Mingled with this is the damp, earthy scent rising from the floor, a constant reminder of the ground just inches beneath. And then, of course, there's the undeniable, close aroma of unwashed humanity, bodies huddled tight, sharing not just space, but every exhaled breath, every quiet sigh in the darkness. The sounds are muted, intimate. The soft rustle of straw as someone shifts in their sleep, seeking a less cold spot. The rhythmic, sometimes wheezing, breath of young and old alike. A fragile chorus against the distant mournful howl of the wind as it claws at the wattle and daub walls. Occasionally, a soft snort, or the shuffle of a hoof from the precious livestock sharing this refuge, their animal warmth a small, vital contribution to the collective effort of simply staying alive. Privacy is a concept as foreign here as a feast in winter. Every cough, every murmur, every dream-muttered word is public domain. Imagine for a moment, you are part of this huddle. The rough weave of a shared woolen blanket, if you're lucky enough to have one that isn't riddled with holes, scratches against your skin. The person beside you, perhaps a child, a sibling, or an elderly parent, is a very real, very present warmth, but also a very real, very present collection of elbows and knees in the cramped dark. The flickering light we spoke of does little to dispel the oppressive gloom. Instead, it makes shadows dance and writhe, turning familiar, cramped surroundings into a shifting, uncertain landscape until dawn finally, reluctantly, breaks. This single room is bedroom, kitchen, nursery, and sometimes even a sick room. Life, in all its raw, unfiltered entirety, unfolds right here, pressed close against the relentless cold. Beyond the immediate, vital warmth of shared breath and bodies, there was the hut itself, your primary shield. But what a shield it was. Imagine, for a moment, running your hand along the interior wall. You wouldn't feel smooth, solid stone, or even sturdy, well-fitted timber, not for most. Instead, your fingers would trace the rough, uneven texture of wattle and daub. This was a practical, common construction. A lattice of pliable wooden branches, perhaps hazel or willow, woven like a giant, coarse basket between upright posts. This woody skeleton was then daubed, or smeared, with a thick, sticky mixture. What went into this daub? Think earthy, readily available materials. Wet soil, clay, perhaps some chalk, animal dung for binding, and straw or animal hair to give it some cohesion. It was a barrier, yes, but a porous one. On the coldest nights, the wind wouldn't just whistle outside. It would find its way in, whispering through countless tiny imperfections, a chilling breath against your neck. You'd hear the relentless sigh and occasional shriek of the winter gales pressing against these modest defenses. Frost would creep across the interior surface, tracing delicate, icy patterns, a beautiful but cruel reminder of the cold's persistence. The scent of damp earth, animal life, and wood smoke would be ever present, mingling with the faint, acrid tang of the daub itself. These walls weren't so much a fortress against the cold as a constantly negotiated truce, a fragile membrane between the meager warmth within and the vast, freezing dark without. They stood, testament to resilience, but also a constant, tactile reminder of vulnerability. And even as those walls offered their meager protection, the battle against the encroaching chill was far from over. Listen, really listen, past the wind's broader lament, past the groan of timber settling under the frost's relentless grip. In the quieter moments, you'd begin to discern the subtler invasions, the soft, almost mournful sigh from one corner, a sharper, higher-pitched whistle from another. These were the draft, the cold's stealthy little fingers, probing every imperfection in your home's humble skin. They were the unwelcome, unseen guests who never knocked, simply found their way through the ill-fitting door that scraped against the earthen floor, or a tiny gap where the daub had cracked and shrunk away from a warped timber beam, a silent testament to the endless, wearying dance between human effort and nature's slow decay. Each tiny breach was a victory for the frost, a chilling, invisible tendril that snaked across the dirt floor or raised goose flesh on the back of your neck as you huddled, seeking warmth. You might see the small, precious flame of a tallow dip flicker and dance erratically as one of these currents whispered past. These weren't dramatic, roaring incursions of wind. Rather, it was a more patient, wearing assault, 1,000 tiny pricks of cold. Trying to plug them was an ongoing, often frustrating task, a nightly ritual of feeling for the source, stuffing it with whatever scrap of cloth or twist of straw came to hand, knowing all the while that the cold, like an unwelcome and persistent gossip, would always find a new way to murmur its presence into your small, smoky world. The very air itself seemed to carry these faint, chilling messages, thin and sharp, from the vast, frozen darkness outside. And that chill wasn't just a whisper in the air, a guest that overstayed its welcome in the smoky gloom. It had a far more intimate, more insistent way of making its presence known. It crept up from below, from the very ground you stood upon, a silent, unwavering pressure. Imagine, for a moment, your bare feet, or perhaps feet thinly wrapped in worn scraps of wool or coarse linen, pressing down. What meets them? Not a polished wooden board, certainly not the luxury of stone flags for most. No, you'd feel the unforgiving, uneven hardness of packed earth, cold and slightly damp to the touch. This floor, this most fundamental surface of your dwelling, was a direct conduit to the winter's frozen heart. Sometimes, a thin, uneven scattering of rushes or old straw might lie strewn across it, a meager, almost token attempt at comfort. You can almost smell their faint, slightly musty, earthy scent, mingled with the persistent dampness of the soil beneath. These scattered remnants would rustle dryly, a brittle, papery sound in the otherwise still, cold air, as you moved carefully in the dimness. But they offered precious little real insulation. The cold, like a patient, invisible tide, simply seeped through these sparse, trodden layers, up through the soles of your feet, a deep, gnawing chill that seemed to emanate from the very bones of the world itself. It was a cold that felt ancient, unyielding, a constant, wearying reminder of your precarious perch between the frozen earth and the often leaky roof above. Not. Above you, the roof offers its own dubious protection, and around you, the walls of your small dwelling are a fragile bulwark against the immense, pressing cold of the outside world. Look around this dimly lit space, and you might notice the very few, very small openings that serve as windows. Or perhaps there are none at all. In a world where every sliver of warmth was precious, a large, glassy window was an unimaginable luxury, and indeed a dangerous folly for most. These openings, if they existed in your simple home, would likely be mere slits in the wattle and daub or roughly hewn gaps in the timber. They might be covered by crudely fashioned wooden shutters, heavy and ill-fitting, their edges letting in thin, whistling drafts. Sometimes, a piece of stretched animal bladder, scraped thin and translucent, might offer a pale, blurry light, a sort of primitive, hazy pane. More often, though, any such opening would simply be stuffed with rags, straw, or even dried moss to block the relentless chill. You'd push these coverings aside for a precious few hours during the day, allowing a sliver of weak, wintry light to penetrate the gloom, perhaps just enough to see the worn wooden bowl in your hands or the face of a family member across the cramped space. But with that light came the biting air, a constant, unwelcome guest. The decision was a wearying one, a daily calculation. How much vital daylight, necessary for even the simplest of tasks, could you possibly afford in exchange for the inevitable, chilling loss of warmth? Even the smallest, unsealed gap felt like an open wound, inviting the frost to seep inside. As dusk fell, these tiny portals to the outside world would be firmly sealed, plunging the interior into a profound, almost tangible darkness. The air would grow thick, heavy with the mingled sense of wood smoke from the central hearth, the damp earth beneath your feet, and the close, human smell of bodies huddled together for shared heat. It was a close, almost womb-like dimness, yet one always tinged with the quiet, persistent awareness of the vast, indifferent cold pressing in from just beyond those thin, fragile walls. The last vestiges of gray light would now be fading from even the largest cracks. This was the signal for the final, vital acts of defense. Wooden shutters, often rough-hewn and ill-fitting, would be pressed into their frames. The scrape of wood on wood, a familiar, almost reassuring sound in its finality, followed by the dull thud as a wooden bar dropped into place. Perhaps you're one of the older children, your small hands useful for wedging them tight, feeling the splintery surface against your skin. Each shutter closed was a small victory, another chink in the night's formidable armor sealed against the encroaching chill. Then, the more meticulous work would begin, a communal dance in the deepening gloom, lit only by the faint flickering glow from the central hearth, if you were lucky enough to have one still smoldering with a little precious fuel. Bundles of old rags, saved precisely for this purpose, threadbare, perhaps smelling faintly of old wool or damp linen, would be carefully stuffed into every remaining crevice. Straw, too, prickly and rustling, would be pushed with determination into larger gaps around doorframes, or, where the crude wall timbers didn't quite meet the daub. It was a shared task, a quiet, almost ritualistic plugging of holes, each person knowing their small contribution mattered immensely to the collective warmth, or rather, the collective desperate reduction of cold. The air inside, already thick from the day's life and the sealed environment, would become even stiller, the outside world now muted to a distant, mournful sigh of wind through bare branches, or perhaps the chilling howl of a wolf carried on the icy air. It wasn't warmth, not in the way we understand it today, but a vital lessening of the biting cold, a fragile truce painstakingly negotiated with the harsh, uncaring elements. The hovel, now a dim, sealed chamber, held its breath, a small, huddled island of meager human resilience against the vast, indifferent ocean of the winter night. Every tiny draft blocked was a silent, hopeful prayer for survival until the pale light of morning. And so, with the outside world hopefully, somewhat, kept at bay, our attention, and indeed that of the peasant family, would draw inwards, towards the very core of their small, smoky world. Here, in the center of the single room, lay the hearth. It wasn't just a place for fire. It was the pulsating heart of the home, a focal point of fragile existence, especially on these bone-chilling nights. Picture it now, a shallow depression in the earthen floor, perhaps ringed with a few carefully placed stones, cradling a precious, meticulously tended fire. The flames, never truly large or roaring for fear of wasting precious fuel, would cast a warm, amber glow, pushing back the deepest, most oppressive shadows, making familiar faces appear almost spectral, softened and aged in the flickering light. The air would be thick, almost tangible, with the smell of wood smoke, a perfume that clung to everything, embedding itself in clothes, hair, the very daub and wattle walls of the hovel. It was an acrid, sometimes eye-stinging presence, a constant companion in their lungs, yet also a strangely comforting one, for it signified life, it signified heat. You'd hear the gentle, almost hypnotic crackle and pop of burning timber, perhaps a soft hiss as a drop of moisture met the embers, a soft, rhythmic counterpoint to the wind's relentless moans beyond the flimsy walls. This was the sacred circle where the family gathered, not just for the physical sensation of warmth seeping into chilled limbs, but for a shared, unspoken sense of survival. Their bodies would be pressed close, a huddle of humanity absorbing every stray calorie of heat, a small constellation of life around a miniature smoky sun. It was a fragile, flickering beacon against the overwhelming dark and the gnawing cold, a testament to simple, stubborn resilience in a world that offered few comforts. But that precious, smoky sun demanded constant tribute, a daily offering of labor that began long before the first shivers of dusk. Fuel wasn't simply bought, it was won, wrested from a landscape that often seemed reluctant to share its meager warmth. The effort to keep even that small fire alive was a constant, gnawing concern, a thread woven through every waking hour, especially as the days grew shorter and the air bit sharper, a crisp, unwelcome reminder of the night to come. Imagine, if you will, the slow trudge out into the gray light of a winter morning, the ground beneath your worn leather shoes likely frozen hard or slick with mud. Often, this task fell to the women and children, their hands already raw from other endless chores, the cold seeping into their bones. They'd venture into the dwindling common woodlands, eyes scanning the frosted ground for fallen branches, twigs, anything combustible. Every dry stick was a prize, every piece of wind-felled wood, heavy in their arms, a small blessing against the encroaching night. Their backs would ache, fingers growing numb as they bundled their precious, meager finds. In areas where wood was scarce, perhaps near windswept coasts or on higher ground, the search turned to the boggy, open moorlands. Here, the prize was peat, dense, earthy sod, laboriously cut with special spades in the warmer months, then carefully stacked to dry. The scent of burning peat, acrid and uniquely smoky, tinged with the damp earth from which it came, would have been a familiar, almost comforting aroma in many a humble dwelling. Carrying these heavy, rough-textured bricks back, often over uneven, treacherous ground, was another form of quiet, daily heroism. Each load, no matter how small, represented a few more hours of precious respite, a brief reprieve from the cold's relentless, invisible siege. There was rarely a grand stockpile, no comforting certainty of warmth for weeks to come. Each day's gathering was a gamble against the fading light, a hope that enough could be found to see them through the biting chill of another long, dark night. It was an unceasing cycle, this quest for warmth, a fundamental rhythm of medieval peasant life, where survival itself was measured in armfuls of wood and sods of peat, each piece a small, hard-won victory. And what exactly fed those small, precious flames, those tiny bastions against the encroaching dark? Firewood, naturally, was the most sought after. Not just any fallen branch, but often wood carefully gathered from managed woodlands, perhaps with the Lord's grudging permission, each twig and bough a hard-won prize. Each billet of seasoned oak or ash was a treasure, promising a cleaner burn, a more generous heat, and the comforting resinous scent that spoke of true warmth, a rare luxury. The sound of it crackling was a gentle music in the otherwise silent hut, a soft counterpoint to the sighing wind outside. But where forests were distant or forbidden, the earth itself offered an alternative. Peat. Imagine trudging to the bog, the ground soft and yielding underfoot, to cut blocks of this dark fibrous fuel. Heavy and damp, it had to be dried for weeks, a patient process demanding space and dry air, both often in short supply. When it finally burned, it was a slow, sulky smolder, releasing a uniquely pungent, acrid smoke. This smoke, thick and clinging, would permeate everything: your clothes, your hair, the very fabric of the hut, a constant earthy perfume that was the signature scent of many a peasant dwelling. It wasn't always pleasant, this persistent aroma, but it was the smell of survival. And when even peat was scarce, or the journey to the bog too perilous in the depths of winter's icy grip. Then, necessity dictated even humbler solutions. Dried animal dung, carefully collected from the byre or the fields and shaped into cakes, became the fuel of last resort. It burned with a low, often smoky heat, its own distinct aroma perhaps a stark testament to the harsh realities of the time. Yet, it burned. It offered a flicker of life, a stubborn refusal to yield to the cold, a quiet testament to the ingenuity born of desperation, each glowing ember a small defiance. But before even the humblest fuel, like the dried dung cakes we spoke of, could offer its meager warmth, there was the ritual, ancient and vital, of coaxing flame from stone and spark. This wasn't mere chore, it was a skill, a legacy held in calloused hands, passed down through the dim corridors of generations, each strike a whisper from the past. Picture it, if you will, as the deepest chill of night still clings to everything. The air inside your single-room dwelling is colder than a gravedigger's handshake, thick with the smell of damp earth, and perhaps the faint, stale ghost of last night's smoke from a long-dead hearth. Your fingers, stiff and clumsy with the pre-dawn cold, fumble for the familiar tools, kept close and dry. There's a shard of flint, its edges still reassuringly sharp, a piece of well-used steel, perhaps a cherished, worn sliver passed down, its surface bearing the faint scratches of countless strikes. And the tinderbox, a small, precious container, safeguarding its flammable treasure, a scrap of carefully charred linen, or a piece of soft amadou fungus, meticulously prepared to be almost impossibly eager for even the smallest spark. Then, the moment of creation. Not a brute force collision, but a precise, swift graze of steel against flint, angled just so. A tiny shower of incandescent stars, achingly brief, brilliant against the oppressive gloom. All your attention, all your immediate hope, is fixed on that fragile tinder held beneath. Will it catch this time? Sometimes, infuriatingly, nothing. A tiny puff, a fleeting tease, and then darkness rushes back in. Other times, a faint orange glow begins to bloom, a hesitant eye opening in the soft, dark tinder. You lean in, your breath a gentle, coaxing current, a whispered prayer hoping to nurture this nascent heat. When it finally catches, that first tentative lick of actual flame is a small, profound miracle. It's the very heart of the home being rekindled before your eyes. The oppressive darkness begins a slow retreat, casting dancing, elongated shadows on the rough wattle and daub walls. The hut, just moments before a cold, near-lightless space, begins its slow, welcome transformation, promising a shield, however fragile and smoky, against the vast, uncaring cold that still reigns supreme outside. And as that tiny flame grows, coaxed and fed with precious twigs, it becomes more than just a source of heat. It's a living, breathing entity in the center of your small world, a defiant spark against the immense, indifferent night. The orange glow pushes back the edges of the impenetrable blackness, revealing the familiar, rough-hewn surfaces of your home. The packed earth floor, the simple wooden bench, perhaps a sleeping child bundled in rags nearby. The air, still sharp with the memory of frost, begins to soften, carrying the faint, reassuring scent of wood smoke, a perfume of survival. This flickering beacon is your main defense, not just against the biting chill that seeps through every crack and poorly thatched roof, but against the things that lurk in the deep shadows of the medieval mind. Outside, the wind might howl like a starving wolf, carrying tales of things unseen, of spirits that wander the frozen fields, or simply the very real threat of creatures emboldened by the darkness. Inside, though, within the small circle of light cast by your hearth, there's a semblance of control, a pocket of perceived safety. The fire crackles, a companionable sound, its warmth, a tangible blessing on your skin. It keeps the deepest, most primal fears at bay, those anxieties the darkness so readily breeds. It's a silent guardian, this precious fire, a fragile boundary between your small family and the vast, unknowable wilderness of the night. Its dance is the only movement that isn't born of shivering. But this guardian, This welcome flicker against the profound, bone-chilling cold isn't without its own quiet, persistent demands. As the flames consume the precious hard-won wood, a ghostly haze begins to gather, almost imperceptibly at first, then steadily, relentlessly thickening. The single small room you share with your family, and perhaps even a few prized animals huddled close for their own desperate survival, slowly fills with a biting, acrid perfume. The scent of wood smoke, so potent it almost becomes a flavor in the air. There's no grand chimney here, no efficient flue to draw it away. Perhaps just a small, hopeful hole in the thatched roof, often deliberately covered to keep out the even more bitter wind, the driving snow, or the freezing rain. So the smoke lingers, a constant, unwelcome guest that curls and eddies in the dim light. It stings your eyes, making them water, a sensation you become so accustomed to. It's barely registered as discomfort anymore, just a part of being. You'd find yourself blinking, a slow, tired reflex, trying to peer through the ever-present gray veil that softens all edges and mutes the already scarce colors of your world. It catches in your throat, a dry, scratchy irritation that contributes to a persistent winter cough. Look up towards the low ceiling, and you'd see the rough-hewn rafters, the very bones of your small, dim home, coated in a thick, greasy, almost treacly layer of black soot. This sticky, dark blanket is a testament to countless nights spent just like this, a visible accumulation of winter's breath. It's the color of the inside of a well-used cooking pot, a permanent shadow clinging to everything. This was the inescapable trade-off, the daily, nightly bargain for a little heat, a little life wrested from the icy grip of the medieval winter. The day, such as it was in the dim winter light, is truly done. Supper, a meager affair, is finished. Now, the most crucial ritual of the evening begins, a task performed with a quiet, practiced reverence. The flames that danced so merrily earlier, offering their precious warmth and feeble light, have now dwindled. They are tired, sinking low, leaving behind a bed of glowing, pulsating embers, a treasure more valuable than gold on these frigid nights. Imagine watching as a member of the household, perhaps the mother, her face etched with the day's toil, kneels by the hearth. With a simple fire-hardened stick, or even a flat piece of stone, she begins to gently, oh so gently, draw the accumulated ash over these precious coals. It's a delicate dance. Too much smothering, and the heart of the fire will die completely, condemning everyone to a truly bitter, lightless dawn and the arduous task of seeking new fire from a neighbor. Too little covering, and the embers might burn out too quickly. Or worse, a stray spark could ignite the dry thatch roof just inches above your head. She carefully builds a mound of this fine gray powder, a soft, insulating blanket over the brightest reds and oranges. You'd see the fiery glow dim, retreating under its dusty covering, transforming into a soft, watchful pulse beneath the surface. It's like tucking a tiny, sleeping dragon into bed, a creature of warmth you desperately hope will awaken with vigor at first light. The air in the hut grows noticeably colder, as the last visible glow is concealed, the faint, comforting crackle of the fire fading to an almost complete silence. This banked fire is a fragile promise, a small ember of hope against the vast, encroaching cold of the medieval night. With the fire now a mere whisper, a gentle sigh of warmth fading into the dark, the true chill of the medieval night begins to assert itself inside your small, timber-framed world. It seeps through the daubed walls, a silent, invisible tide. So what did a peasant family wear to bed? To fend off this persistent, gnawing cold, when even the banked embers offered so little comfort. Their daytime garments, simple and hard-worn, were often their only night clothes too. Imagine the feel of a coarse woolen tunic, still carrying the faint earthy sense of the day's labor. Wood smoke, damp soil, perhaps even a hint of livestock if you worked closely with animals. This wasn't the soft, comforting wool we know today. It was often scratchy, thick, and heavy, designed for durability above all else, a shield rather than a caress. Underneath this, perhaps a linen shift or braise. Basic undergarments that offered a thin, slightly smoother layer against the skin, though still far from luxurious by our reckoning. As the night deepened and the fire's warmth receded further, these everyday clothes became your nocturnal armor. You wouldn't slip into special pajamas. You'd simply burrow deeper, perhaps pulling your heavy woolen cloak, your constant outdoor companion, over yourself like an extra, somewhat stiff blanket. If you were fortunate, you might have a spare scrap of cloth or an old sack to tuck around your feet or shoulders, anything to create another barrier against the drafts that snaked across the earthen floor. Every thread, every patch, was a small defiance against the biting air. The clothes were a close, familiar presence, a second skin that, however inadequate by our modern standards, was all that stood between a peasant family and the deep, bone-aching cold of a winter's night. It was a simple strategy born of sheer necessity, layering what little they possessed, a quiet, nightly battle for warmth in the heart of the slumbering frozen land. And so, your daytime clothes, the ones you'd toiled in from dawn's first gray light until the last sliver of sun vanished, were not something you'd casually shed before sleep. That tunic of coarse, undyed wool, perhaps a rough linen undershirt if you were fortunate, clung to you still. It carried the faint, lingering scent of your day, wood smoke from the meager fire, damp earth from the fields, maybe the honest sweat of labor, or the sweet sour tang of animal fodder if your animal companions shared your humble dwelling. These weren't soft, comforting pajamas as we might imagine. The wool could be decidedly scratchy against the skin, the linen stiff until worn almost to disintegration. Yet these familiar textures were part of the nightly ritual. These garments were your constant companions, a second, tougher skin. If you possessed anything extra, another ragged tunic, a length of well-used sacking, even a strip of felted wool, perhaps bartered for with a few precious eggs, it would be carefully draped over the shoulders, or tucked around any children sleeping nearby. Every single thread, every additional scrap of fabric was a vital ally. Each layer, however meager, trapped a little more of your body's precious warmth, creating small, hard-won pockets of insulation against the relentless chill that pressed in from the wattle and daub walls and the cold earth beneath. There was no luxurious disrobing into dedicated nightwear. Comfort in this context was simply the absence of shivering, the slight easing of the bone-deep cold. Warmth was survival, and survival meant clinging to every scrap of fabric you owned, a silent, nightly vow to see the dawn. So the very idea of dedicated nightwear, of clothes set aside purely for the act of sleeping, would have sounded like a fantastical tale from a distant, wealthy land. There were no soft cotton nightshirts, no flowing gowns waiting beside the hearth. Instead, as the last of the fire's weak lights surrendered to the encroaching dark, you'd simply add to what you already wore. Your single tunic, likely made of rough linen or wool, still carrying the faint scent of the day's labor and the ever-present wood smoke, was your constant companion, day and night. To this, you'd add whatever extra scraps you could muster. That heavy, felted wool cloak, a steadfast guardian against the biting winds and sleet of winter days, transformed into your most substantial blanket. You'd pull its considerable weight over you, feeling its dense, slightly scratchy texture against your skin, hoping it would hoard every precious particle of your body's heat. Its familiar, slightly oily scent of lanolin, mingled with damp earth and smoke, would fill your nostrils. Perhaps an old sack, emptied of grain or flour, its fibers stiff and uncompromising, would be layered on top, adding another thin, desperate shield. Each addition was a small, defiant act against the relentless cold that pressed in, a cold that felt almost alive, seeping from the frozen ground beneath and the thin, porous walls around you. This wasn't about comfort as we know it. It was about enduring the dark hours until the sun and its meager warmth returned. And where did you endure these hours? Your bed, if you could call it that, was a world away from the soft sanctuaries we collapse into today. More often than not, it was a simple straw-stuffed pallet, a coarse sack perhaps, laid directly upon the cold, packed earth floor. As you'd settle onto this meager cushion, the dry stalks would rustle beneath you, a crisp, papery sound in the immense quiet of the frozen night. The straw, often used for many seasons, might carry a faint, musty sweetness, mingled with the scent of dust, and perhaps the unwelcome company of tiny creatures, who also sought refuge from the bitter air within its depths. Sometimes, these pallets were designed for the entire family to burrow into, a single, sprawling nest. Imagine the scene, a tangle of bodies, a living, breathing mound pressed together under a shared, scratchy woolen covering. You'd feel the warmth radiating from your brother, your mother, your father, their quiet breaths and occasional coughs, a constant, strangely reassuring presence in the deep darkness. Personal space, as we understand it, was an unimaginable luxury. Here, closeness was an absolute necessity, a silent pact against the cold. If your family possessed a little more, there might have been a communal wooden frame, a rough-hewn bedstead lifting you a precious few inches from the relentlessly damp earth. This wouldn't offer much more in the way of softness, the timber itself unyielding beneath the thin straw. But that small elevation was a minor triumph. The frame might groan and creak with every collective shift in weight, a somber, rhythmic sound in the otherwise still house. This wasn't about indulgence. This was a strategic huddle, a pooling of every last calorie of warmth, patiently waiting for the pale, hesitant light of dawn. Beneath you, or perhaps just cushioning the hard-packed earth directly, lies the bedding itself. Imagine settling into a mound of dried bracken or straw. You can hear the faint rustle as you shift, a dry, whispering sound that seems to amplify in the profound quiet of the night. It's not soft, not in the way we understand it. Each stalk and stem makes its presence known, a slightly scratchy, uneven surface that conforms only grudgingly to your body. The smell is deeply earthy, a mix of dust and dried vegetation, perhaps tinged with the faint, smoky aroma from the dying embers of the central hearth, a scent that clings to everything within these wattle and daub walls, a constant reminder of the day's meager fire. If your family was a little more fortunate, a rough, undressed animal skin might be thrown over this collection of plant matter. Maybe a sheepskin, its wool still thick and slightly greasy to the touch, or the coarser, stiffer hide of a deer. This adds another layer of texture, the surprisingly unyielding backing of the hide, and then the denser, more insulating feel of the fur or wool against your skin, if you were lucky enough to have it on top. It carries its own distinct, slightly musky animal scent, a primal aroma that mingles with the straw, a smell of survival. This wasn't luxury, not by any stretch of the imagination. It was a vital barrier against the gnawing cold that seeped up from the ground and through the thin walls. Every little bit of insulation, no matter how crude, was hoarded, cherished, and shared. The difference between a shivering night and one with a scrap of hide could be profound. And this sharing extended far beyond mere objects, beyond a scrap of wool or hide. In the deep, unforgiving chill of a medieval winter's night, the most precious, life-sustaining resource was often each other. Picture, if you will, the scene unfolding in countless dim, cramped spaces across the land. Perhaps the only room of a peasant dwelling, where the embers of the day's fire have faded to a dull orange whisper, casting long, dancing shadows that make familiar shapes seem strange. Here, the entire family would gather, a close-knit human huddle against the encroaching, relentless cold. This wasn't a choice born of affection alone, though the bonds of family undoubtedly provided a deep, unspoken comfort, but it was, above all, a stark and unyielding necessity. The smallest children, their tiny bodies most vulnerable to the biting frost that seeped through every crack and crevice, would be nestled securely in the very heart of this human warmth, tucked safely between the adults. You can almost feel the gentle, reassuring pressure of bodies close pressed, the shared exhalations misting faintly in the cool air, a collective warmth that formed a fragile yet vital shield. The air itself would be thick, a close tapestry woven from the scent of lingering wood smoke, of unwashed bodies, a common reality, not a failing. And perhaps the faint, earthy aroma of the straw beneath. Sounds would be muted, intimate. The soft, rhythmic cadence of breathing in unison, a child's sleepy sigh, the occasional rustle and shuffle as someone sought a slightly more comfortable position on the packed earth floor, all wrapped under a shared, rough-spun blanket, if they were fortunate. This communal sleeping arrangement was more than just practical. It was a living, breathing blanket, a testament to profound human resilience, and a quiet, instinctual act of love in the face of a world that offered so very few other comforts. Beyond the shared warmth of bodies, or perhaps in addition to it, lay the crucial embrace of fabric. If you were fortunate enough to have more than just your day clothes, your covering for the night would likely be a heavy cloak, often the same one worn during the day, or a dedicated piece of coarse woolen blanket. This wasn't the soft, inviting wool we might choose today. No, this material was spun from the hardy, often greasy fleece of medieval sheep, built for resilience rather than refinement, its primary job to simply keep the elements at bay. Imagine for a moment pulling such a covering over you as the last ember in the hearth fades. The texture would be undeniably rough, perhaps even a little stiff from wear and damp, scratching faintly against your skin with every small movement. It might carry the faint, lingering scent of lanolin from the wool, mixed with wood smoke from countless fires, and the ever-present damp earthiness of the hut itself. Heavy, yes, distinctly so. But this weight, this coarseness, was precisely its virtue. It formed a welcome, if somewhat abrasive, barrier against the insidious cold, a cold that crept under doors, through any unsealed crack in the wattle and daub walls, a relentless, biting presence on the darkest, longest nights. Each rough thread, though a minor irritant in itself, collectively wove a net of surprising warmth, a small defiance against the frost. This wasn't comfort in the modern sense. It was a raw, essential shield, the difference between shivering wakefulness and a few precious hours of rest. But even the thickest blanket, the most carefully patched wall, could only do so much against the relentless chill that gnawed at the edges of the night. Before you even thought of burrowing under those coarse woolens, surrendering to whatever sleep might come, there was another ritual, another vital layer of defense to be built, this time from within. The evening meal. It was rarely a feast, not by any stretch of a hungry imagination, and certainly nothing to write home about, if you could write. More often than not, it was pottage, a thick, almost stubbornly gloopy stew of whatever grains and hearty vegetables could be spared, simmered for hours over the precious dwindling embers of the central hearth. Imagine the steam, thick and fragrant with the smell of the earth, rising from your rough-hewn wooden bowl. It carried the honest scent of boiled barley or oats, perhaps the slightly sweet, damp aroma of turnip, or, if you were fortunate, a sliver of treasured, hoarded onion sharp enough to make your eyes water just a little. It wouldn't win any culinary awards, this humble, repetitive fare, but its simple, profound warmth was an undeniable blessing. Each spoonful, heavy and often bland, was less about sophisticated flavor and more about essential fuel. You'd feel it, a slow, spreading comfort radiating from your belly, a small, internal fire diligently stoked against the creeping darkness and the icy fingers of the night. This wasn't just about staving off the pangs of hunger until morning. It was about arming your very core against the bitter frost that would soon be testing the limits of your small, smoky home. A full stomach, even one filled with such monotonous gruel, was a surprisingly robust shield. A small, warm victory won before the long, cold vigil began. And that monotonous gruel, that internal fire, often took one specific, humble form: pottage. Picture, if you will, not a delicate consommé served in fine china, but a robust, steaming bowl, its contents often a muted tapestry of earthy browns and greens. This was the centerpiece, the heart of the evening meal, especially as the wind howled outside and frost began to paint the world white. Inside this humble vessel, you'd find hearty grains like barley or oats, boiled for hours until they swelled into a thick, porridge-like consistency, forming a dense, filling base. Alongside them, whatever root vegetables could be painstakingly coaxed from the stubbornly frozen earth: pale turnips, earthy parsnips, perhaps a few tenacious kale leaves, all simmered into a yielding, almost homogeneous softness. Meat, of course, was a whispered dream for many such meals. If it graced the pottage at all, it might be a few precious morsels of salted pork, diced so small each bite was a lottery, or perhaps an old boiling fowl's bone, diligently simmered to extract every last vestige of flavor, lending a subtle, savory depth to the brew. The aroma itself would be unpretentious. Damp earth from the vegetables, the nutty scent of cooked grains, and the ever-present comforting hint of wood smoke from the hearth where it bubbled patiently. Holding the rough-hewn wooden bowl, its surface smoothed by countless hands, you'd feel the substantial warmth seep into your chilled fingers, the steam rising like a soft breath to warm your face. Each spoonful, thick and profoundly warming, wasn't a culinary revelation by our standards, but it was so much more. It was sustenance, a shield, the very essence of resilience, a bulwark against the gnawing cold that relentlessly pressed against the thin walls of your home. This simple, steaming offering was a quiet, shared ritual, a small, warm victory repeated night after weary night. And sometimes, just sometimes, that wasn't the end of the evening's comfort. If fortune truly smiled upon your small, smoky dwelling, if the harvest had been kind or a little surplus remained, a cup of something else warm might follow that humble stew. Perhaps it was a rough clay mug, or even a well-worn wooden tankard, passed around with care, its contents precious. Inside, a measure of weak ale or a gently warmed cider. Don't picture the crisp, clear ciders of a modern autumn, nor the strong, hoppy ales you might find in a tavern today. This would be a different creature altogether. A small beer, perhaps, low in alcohol, cloudy and a little sweet, brewed with whatever grain was to hand. Or it might be a cider that was mellow, perhaps a touch tart, tasting faintly of the earth and the gnarled apple trees from which its fruit came. The scent alone, a subtle mix of fruit or grain mingling with the wood smoke, would be a small comfort in the chilly air of your one-room home. You'd cradle the cup, feeling its residual heat seep into your palms, a second, gentler wave of warmth after the stew bowl. The first sip wouldn't be a jolt, but a slow, spreading sensation. This liquid warmth traveled from your throat, down into your belly, and seemed to radiate outwards, unknotting tired muscles, chasing away a little of the persistent ache of the cold. It wasn't purely for pleasure, this drink, though any pleasure was gratefully received. The weak ale or cider was often far safer than the suspect water from the well or stream, and every sip also carried precious, easily absorbed calories, more fuel to keep your internal fire burning through the long, dark hours. It was a quiet punctuation mark at the end of a hard day, a small, shared luxury that did more than just hydrate or offer a sliver of energy. It was a moment of gentle peace, a brief respite where the world, for just a few sips, felt a little less harsh, a little more bearable. This simple drink was another small act of defiance against the night, a final, warm embrace before the family huddled together, seeking whatever communal warmth they could find against the encroaching frost. But warmth from bodies alone, however tightly pressed, wouldn't see them through to the pale, uncertain light of morning, not for long. Beyond the immediate comfort of shared breath and human touch lay a more profound, and perhaps more anxious consideration. The winter stores. Imagine, if you will, a small, cool corner of their cramped dwelling, or perhaps a roughly dug cellar beneath the earthen floor. Here, carefully, almost reverently, were kept the fruits of a year's relentless toil, the difference between a hungry winter and one that simply ended. There would be sacks of dried beans, hard as pebbles, rattling softly if disturbed, promising a slow-cooked, humble sustenance. Hanging from the low beams, perhaps, would be rows of smoked fish, herring, maybe, or cod, their skin a deep, burnished bronze, their scent a pungent, oily reminder of distant seas or a good river catch. The air around them would be thick with this smoky, fishy tang, a smell that spoke of preservation, of fending off decay. And alongside, chunks of salted meat, often pork, encased in a thick crust of precious salt, the flesh beneath a deep, almost bruised red. Each piece represented not just a future meal, but countless hours of labor in the raising, the slaughtering, the curing. These weren't luxuries. They were lifelines. Each spoonful of rehydrated beans, each sliver of smoky fish carefully rationed, each tough, salty mouthful of meat was a tiny victory against the gnawing cold and the ever-present specter of starvation. The sight of a well-stocked, if modest, larder was perhaps the most comforting image a peasant family could hold in their minds as they drifted off to sleep, a silent promise of another day, another meal, another chance. And that promise, that silent assurance from the larder, would soon transform into something far more immediate. Picture it, if you will. The day's meager warmth has long since fled, chased away by a darkness that feels almost solid, pressing in from beyond the thin wooden walls. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of wood smoke, and perhaps the earthy aroma of simmering root vegetables, a thin but precious stew bubbling over the hearth, its gentle plops a counterpoint to the sighing wind outside. You'd hold the rough-hewn wooden bowl, its contents radiating a gentle heat into your chilled, work-worn fingers. The first spoonful, or perhaps a sip of warmed, watered-down ale if fortune smiled, would send a tendril of warmth unfurling deep within your chest, a slow bloom in the landscape of internal cold. It's not a rich feast, not by any stretch of our modern imaginations, just a simple, hot meal, perhaps a little bland, a little repetitive, but oh, the profound comfort in that rising heat, spreading outwards, loosening the tight knot of cold that had settled in your very bones. Each swallow is a small defiance against the encroaching frost that bites at the edges of the hut. For a little while, the gnawing emptiness in your belly subsides, replaced by a fragile, temporary sense of well-being, a physical sigh of relief. The wind might still whistle through the inevitable cracks in the daub and wattle, a mournful song of the long, dark hours ahead. But in this fleeting moment, with the warmth of food settling in, there is a quiet, almost sacred contentment. It's a potent feeling, this temporary peace, a brief, glowing island in the vast, unyielding ocean of a medieval winter's night, a sensation to be savored before the cold begins its slow, inevitable creep back towards your core. That fragile warmth from your meager supper begins to ebb away, like a tide receding from a cold shore. Darkness is no longer just encroaching. It has fully arrived, absolute and profound, pressing in from all sides of your small, dim world. And as your eyes adjust to seeing almost nothing, your ears become more attuned to the subtle and not-so-subtle symphony of the medieval night. Listen, the wind, which earlier sang a mournful song through the daub and wattle, now seems to find new instruments. It howls with a deeper, more resonant voice around the corners of your hut, a relentless, sighing pressure that you can almost feel against your skin, even indoors. The very timbers of your home groan in response. A tired, rhythmic creaking sound that seems to echo the persistent ache in your own cold bones. Each pop and crack from the wooden frame is a stark reminder of the thin, fragile barrier between your huddled family and the biting, indifferent expanse outside. And then, slicing through the wind's lament, comes another sound, carried on the cold air. A distant cry, perhaps. The mournful, almost ghostly hoot of a hunting owl, its call drifting from the deep, unseen woods that border the cleared fields. Or maybe, further off, carried from the desolate moorlands, the long, chilling howl of a wolf, a primal sound that speaks of hunger and the untamed wild. These aren't mere noises. They are the old, ever-present voices of the land, a stark contrast to the imagined deep silence within a lord's sturdy, fire-lit stone chamber. Here, in the profound dark, these sounds are your only, and often unsettling companions until the first faint, hopeful hint of dawn. As those sounds of the wild night weave their way through the thin daub walls of your hut, the darkness itself becomes a character in your small, cold world. It's not the gentle dimness of a modern room after lights out, softened by distant street lights or the glow of a screen. No, this is a deep, ancient blackness, almost solid, pressing in from all sides, a darkness so complete that your own hand, held before your face, is just a rumor, a half-forgotten shape. Your only anchor in this velvety ocean of black is the heart of your dwelling, the banked fire. It's not a cheerful blaze, not at this hour. It's a low, slumbering beast, a cluster of embers carefully nestled beneath a blanket of ash, a precious store of warmth coaxed to last through the long, frigid hours. This faint, reddish glow, perhaps no bigger than your two cupped hands, breathes a fragile light onto the packed earth floor immediately around it, painting the closest surfaces with a soft, pulsing life. In this minimal, almost reluctant light, The familiar shapes of your one-room home might seem distorted, elongated, taking on new, sometimes unsettling forms. A simple wooden stool could become a crouching creature, a pile of rough sacks, a hunched figure in the corner. This profound darkness is a strange companion. It can feel like a thick blanket, a protective cloak, hiding your meager existence from the harshness of the outside world, from the biting wind that searches for every tiny crack in the wattle and daub. Yet it's also a canvas for fear. Every creak of the hut's timbers under the strain of the cold, every rustle in the thatch above where small creatures might nestle, is magnified by the stillness and the impenetrable dark. Was that the wolf you heard earlier, now perhaps sniffing at the ill-fitting door? Or something less tangible, born from old tales whispered around dwindling fires on nights just like this one? The fire's glow, then, is more than just a pinprick of light. It's a fragile boundary between the known and the deeply, sometimes terrifyingly, unknown. The fire, that small, brave heart of your home, does more than just ward off the biting chill and the shadows that dance with hungry thoughts. It draws your family closer, a huddled constellation of warmth in the vast, indifferent night. Perhaps your grandmother, her face a roadmap of winter's past, her eyes reflecting the low flames, begins a story. Her voice, a low murmur like dry leaves skittering across frozen earth, might recount ancient legends of the forest spirits, their forms half seen in the shifting firelight, or perhaps a slightly embellished tale of her own youth, a time when winters were, of course, even colder, and wolves even bolder. You listen, curled as tightly as you can manage, the words weaving a tapestry against the pervasive silence, punctuated only by the occasional pop and crackle of the burning wood and the soft, rhythmic hush of shared breathing in the cramped space. Sometimes it's not stories, but a quiet prayer, a whispered plea for morning to come swiftly, for the meager stores of grain and dried beans to last, for health to hold in bodies weary from endless toil and the gnawing cold. The words are familiar, worn smooth like river stones from generations of use, a comforting litany against the raw edge of fear. There's a strange intimacy in this shared vulnerability, a silent understanding that passes between you in the dim, smoky air, thick with the smell of wood smoke and unwashed bodies. It's not a grand comfort, perhaps, not the surety of a well-stocked larder or a stone fortress, but a human one. The simple, profound solace of not being entirely alone with the cold, or with the dark that presses in so insistently from all sides. These small rituals, these soft voices barely disturbing the stillness, are anchors in the long, icy drift of the night, fragile threads connecting one frozen moment to the hope of the next. And sometimes, those threads of warmth, those small comforts against the biting chill, weren't just human. The shared breath in the tiny, single-roomed hut was not always just yours and your family's. As the frost sealed the land outside, and the wind howled like a hungry wolf at the wattle and daub walls, another kind of warmth, a more rustic kind, might be invited in. Imagine the door, already barricaded against the night, creaking open just one more time, not for a lost traveler, but for a different sort of housemate. Perhaps a pig, grunting softly as it shuffles into the relative warmth, its bristly hide radiating a surprising heat, or a few precious chickens, clucking sleepily as they're carefully placed in a sheltered corner away from clumsy feet. In truly desperate times, if the byre was too flimsy, or the cold too severe, even the family cow might be led inside, its large, placid presence filling much of the remaining space. Of course, this wasn't an entirely idyllic arrangement. The air, already thick with wood smoke, would now carry the undeniable, earthy perfume of livestock. The soft snuffling and rustling of your animal companions would become part of the night's quiet soundtrack, a constant reminder of your cohabitants. Personal space was a concept for another world, another life. Yet, the gentle heat emanating from these creatures, their living breath adding to the room's meager warmth, was a vital currency. It was a primal comfort, a shared defense against the ice that sought to claim everything. But even this shared warmth, this animal heat and huddled humanity, has its limits against the relentless biting cold of a medieval winter's night. The central hearth, once a cheerful orange eye in the gloom, inevitably fades. Its vibrant song of crackling embers softens to a whisper, then to a bed of glowing, but dying, coals. The chill, like an unwelcome guest, begins to seep back in, first at the edges of your rough-spun blanket, then deeper, finding its way to your very bones. Sleep, in such conditions, is rarely a continuous deep slumber. It's more a series of shallow dives into unconsciousness, punctuated by moments of raw awareness. You might stir, a shiver tracing a path down your spine, your breath misting faintly in the frigid air of the hut. The silence of the deep night is profound, broken only by the occasional sleepy grunt from a nearby pig or the sigh of the wind against the wattle and daub walls. Letting the fire die completely is not an option. Relighting it from scratch in the icy dark with flint and tinder would be a truly miserable prospect. Then, a subtle shift in the darkness. Someone, perhaps a parent or an older sibling, stirs with a practiced quietness. They move with an economy of motion, born from endless repetition, reaching for the small, precious pile of carefully gathered kindling, twigs, dried bracken, perhaps a carefully hoarded piece of drier wood. You'd hear the soft rustle, the almost inaudible click of small branches being arranged. Then, the gentle rhythmic sound of someone blowing softly, patiently, onto the fading embers, coaxing them, pleading with them almost, to reignite. Slowly, tentatively, a tiny spark might dance, then another. A fragile bloom of orange appears, casting faint, flickering shadows on the rough walls. A wisp of smoke, carrying the acrid kiss of newly caught wood, stings the nostrils for a moment before a small flame licks upwards. More fuel is added, piece by tiny piece, until the fire breathes again, a small but determined heart beating back the oppressive cold. For now, at least, the battle is won once more, and the promise of a little more warmth, a little more sleep, settles back over the small, dark room. But even with the small fire now whispering in the hearth, its warmth is a precious, guarded thing, a fragile bloom in the vast darkness. It doesn't truly conquer the chill, not entirely. Instead, it carves out a small island of lesser cold in a vast, uncaring ocean of winter. The stone, or wattle and daub walls of your humble dwelling, perhaps patched with little more than dried mud and fervent hope, offer scant real defense against the night's icy probing fingers. They are porous, those walls, and the wind, a low, mournful singer, finds every tiny crack, every ill-fitting shutter, and whispers its chilling song. You feel it, a slow, inexorable seepage. The cold doesn't just batter the outside, it works its way in, a silent, unwelcome guest determined to stay. It creeps up from the packed earth floor, often damp, a numbing chill that clings to your ankles and steals the warmth from your feet. It radiates from those thin, uneven walls, a constant, subtle pressure against your skin. Even nestled under your meager blanket, perhaps a single layer of rough, homespun wool, or a collection of whatever scraps could be spared, feeling thin and inadequate. The cold makes its presence known. It's a living entity, this medieval cold, patient and utterly pervasive. Sleep, when it finally arrives, is often shallow, a restless state punctuated by involuntary shivers, or the instinctual need to huddle closer to another warm body. A child, a spouse, even a precious animal brought inside for its own survival and its shared heat. The cold settles deep into your bones, a familiar weary ache by the heart of midwinter. It's a relentless, unyielding presence that demands constant vigilance. Every carefully hoarded log on the fire a small act of defiance. Every extra layer of worn clothing a testament to quiet resilience. This isn't just discomfort. It's a nightly battle for simple survival, a profound, enduring struggle against the indifferent, crushing power of the season. And sometimes, even that shared warmth isn't quite enough. The drafts, like insidious whispers of winter, find their way through every tiny chink in the wattle and daub walls, gliding their icy breath across your skin. It's in these profoundly cold moments that the shivering truly takes hold, an involuntary tremor that begins deep within your core and ripples outwards, shaking you with an undeniable force. Your teeth might begin to chatter, a tiny, almost rhythmic percussive beat against the vast, muffling silence of the frozen night. Each muscle fiber, each sinew, tightens and releases in a frantic, minuscule dance, your body desperately trying to spark some flicker of internal fire. Imagine that sensation, not as a brief discomfort you might feel on a chilly evening, easily banished by turning up a thermostat, but as a persistent, unwelcome companion through the long, dark hours. Your jaw aches from the unconscious clenching, your shoulders instinctively hunch, attempting to curl inwards and conserve every last vestige of precious heat. The rough, homespun wool of your tunic, perhaps still faintly damp from the day's toil or the melting snow that clung to it, feels surprisingly abrasive against your trembling skin. It's a primal, often exhaustive response. Your body's almost violent, yet utterly natural. Attempt to fight back against the encroaching, numbing frost. There can be a strange, almost detached feeling as you lie there, observing your own limbs quaking. A stark reminder of how fragile your hold on warmth truly is in this unforgiving world. Sleep, when it finally comes, is less a gentle surrender and more a temporary truce wrestled from the cold. A brief, precious respite before the pale, frigid dawn demands you rise and face it all again. That brief respite, however, is always shadowed by a persistent, gnawing worry, a cold knot forming in the pit of your stomach even as you try to drift into unconsciousness. It's the deep-seated fear of the fire, your small, sputtering heart of warmth in a vast, indifferent ocean of cold, finally surrendering its precious heat to the endless night. You can almost feel the subtle shift in the air, the first hint of a deeper chill as the flames begin to wane. The comforting, rhythmic crackle and pop of burning wood, a sound so constant it's almost woven into the fabric of the silence itself, would begin to falter, then fade. And into that growing quiet, the mournful howl of the wind outside, pressing against the flimsy shutters, would suddenly sound much louder, much closer. A hungry beast sniffing at the door. The dwindling orange glow of the embers, once a cheerful dancing light casting playful shadows on the rough-hewn walls, would become a slow, inexorable countdown. Each fading spark, a tiny, dying star in your cramped universe, marks a step closer to the raw, biting chill that waits patiently, seeping insidiously through every poorly chinked wall and under the ill-fitting door. The acrid scent of dying embers might even replace the comforting smell of wood smoke, a grim reminder of what's to come. Imagine the quiet, shared dread within the small hut, the unspoken understanding that someone, perhaps a parent or an older child, must always remain half awake, their senses attuned to the fire's weakening breath. To let it die wasn't just an inconvenience, a prelude to shivers. It was an invitation to the kind of deep, penetrating cold that settles in the bones and saps the very will to move, a cold from which, for the very young or the old, there might be no easy recovery. It was a palpable failure, not just of warmth, but of vigilance against the ever-present threat. Yet, this precious heart of warmth, so carefully guarded against diminishment, held its own silent, terrible threat. For the same fire that kept the killing frost at bay was a fickle ally, capable of turning with devastating speed. An untended spark, perhaps dislodged by a shifting log, or a sudden draft from a chink in the wattle and daub walls, could become an incandescent fugitive. Imagine it, a tiny pinprick of orange light, landing softly, almost innocently, upon the bone-dry thatch of the roof, or the loose straw scattered across the earthen floor. For a moment, nothing. Then, a wisp of smoke, easily mistaken for a lingering breath of hearth smell. But this smoke would carry a different scent. Sharper, acrid, the smell of panic. The thatch above, dried over long, cold months, or perhaps baked brittle by a distant summer sun, was perfect kindling. A small, hesitant crackle would follow, then another, louder, hungrier. Within moments, that single errant spark could blossom into a ravenous orange beast, consuming the very roof that offered meager protection from the elements. To see your home, your only sanctuary against the bitter winter, devoured by flames would be a truly terrifying spectacle. The frantic scramble to save lives, perhaps a few meager possessions, all while the cold wind whipped the flames higher, promising an even bleaker night ahead. Losing your shelter this way wasn't just about being cold. It was about facing the raw, unforgiving wilderness with nothing. A descent into a desperate fight for survival that many would not win. The vigilance, therefore, was a double-edged sword, a constant balancing act between nurturing the life-giving flame and fearing its destructive potential. Even if your small home was spared the horror of a blaze, the winter's chill was a relentless invader, seeping through wattle and daub walls, under ill-fitting doors. Imagine the dampness, a constant companion. It wasn't just the air that felt cold. It was a clammy presence that clung to your rough-spun clothes, your straw bedding, making everything feel perpetually sodden. This pervasive damp, coupled with the biting drafts that whispered through every crack, worked its way into your very bones. Soon, a tickle in the throat might deepen into a rattling cough, echoing in the cramped, smoky space of your shared room. You'd hear it from your children, your spouse, perhaps even from yourself, a grim chorus against the mournful howl of the wind outside. Joints would begin to throb with a dull, persistent ache, a cruel, daily reminder of the cold that never truly seemed to leave your marrow. These weren't mere discomforts. They were the insidious calling cards of more serious afflictions, patiently waiting. And when a fever eventually took hold, its fiery touch a stark contrast to the icy air. The sense of helplessness must have been profound. There was little true medicine to be had, of course. Perhaps a poultice of herbs, smelling faintly of damp earth and a flicker of hope, was applied to a congested chest. Perhaps a bitter brew, steeped from hoarded leaves and roots gathered in milder seasons, was offered with a murmured prayer. But against the deep, rattling infections settling in the lungs, or the relentless inflammation that made every movement an agony, these were often frail, desperate gestures. A sickness that today might warrant a few days of rest and simple medication could, in that long-ago winter, easily become a final, unwinnable struggle against an invisible foe. The line between a winter chill and a fight for life itself was terrifyingly thin, a quiet dread that settled with the deepening winter gloom. Beyond the invisible dangers lurking within, the cold itself was an enemy with a visible, brutal touch. For those with threadbare cloaks, perhaps patched with rough, mismatched scraps of wool, or worn-out leather shoes stuffed with brittle straw, the frost was a relentless predator. If your small, smoky dwelling had walls that sighed with every icy gust, or a roof that dripped melted snow onto your already damp bedding, the deepest chill of the night air found its way to your skin with an unwelcome intimacy. Imagine, for a moment, that creeping numbness beginning in your fingers, then your toes, as the hours of darkness wear on. At first it's a dull ache, a distant throb, perhaps easily dismissed amidst the general, pervasive misery of being cold and hungry. But then comes the stinging, a sharper, more vicious bite that speaks of tiny ice crystals forming in your very flesh, a cruel, unwelcome artistry. You might try to rub some semblance of life back into them, a frantic, clumsy motion in the near dark, your breath clouding before your face. But if the cold had truly taken hold, the skin would soon turn a waxy, unsettling white, or perhaps a ghastly blue-gray, like old, forgotten stone in a winter churchyard. The sharp pain might even recede then, replaced by an ominous, deceptive lack of feeling. And when, or if, warmth finally returned, perhaps by a meager fire the next morning, the agony could be unimaginable, a burning, throbbing torment as the damaged tissues protested their near death. The aftermath was often permanent, fingers and toes blackened, withered, eventually lost to the insensate cold. A missing digit wasn't just a disfigurement to be hidden. For a peasant whose life depended on the dexterity of their hands and the strength of their feet, it was a profound handicap. It was a daily, painful reminder of one winter's savage victory, making every task, every grip on a tool, every step across a frozen field, a little harder, a little more precarious, for the rest of their days. The cold didn't just threaten life, it chipped away at it, piece by painful piece. The creeping chill that stole fingers and toes, was a constant, hateful companion. But sometimes the darkness outside your wattle and daub walls held more than just the biting wind and the promise of more frost. Imagine lying there, huddled with your family. The fire a pitiful handful of embers, its weak light doing little to push back the deep shadows clinging to the corners of your single room. Every creak of the cottage timbers, every rustle in the thatch overhead, wasn't just the house settling. It could be something else, something alive and unwelcome. Perhaps it was the sound of a lean, hungry wolf, its howl a mournful song carried on the icy air, now sounding closer than comfort allowed, drawn by the faintest scent of livestock, or, heaven forbid, something more. Or maybe smaller, equally desperate creatures, a fox, a badger, scrabbling with frantic claws at the base of the wall, seeking a way into even your meager warmth and stored scraps. Unlikely they'd break in, your door barred as it was. But the sounds, just beyond those thin defenses, would have been utterly terrifying, a chilling soundtrack to the long, dark hours. Sleep would have been a skittish, shallow thing on nights like those, easily broken by the slightest unfamiliar noise. And then, there were the human shadows. In the depths of a brutal winter, when larders were bare and bellies achingly empty, desperation could turn a familiar neighbor, or a desperate stranger passing through, into a potential threat. A soft footfall outside, too deliberate to be an animal. A furtive knock, hesitant yet demanding, or worse, the subtle chilling scrape of something trying the door latch. It's a grim thought, isn't it? That the greatest danger on the coldest night might not be the indifferent ice, but the shivering, starving person on the other side of your flimsy door, driven to acts they'd never otherwise consider. The cold made monsters of the weather, and sometimes it whispered monstrous ideas into human hearts too. And so, with the door barred as best it could be, and the wind still finding its way through countless tiny gaps in the wattle and daub, what else was there but to turn inwards? In the heart of that oppressive, bone-chilling darkness, with the sounds of the night pressing in, another kind of murmur would arise. Not always from fear of intruders, but from a deeper, more constant companion, the need for hope, however faint. Imagine them, a family huddled together for shared warmth, the air thick with the smell of wood smoke, damp earth, and the undeniable scent of human closeness. Perhaps a single sputtering tallow candle, or the last stubborn embers of the fire, cast flickering, dancing shadows on rough-hewn walls and tired, drawn faces. It's here, in these moments of profound vulnerability, that simple prayers would be offered, whispered words, carried on misted breath, released into the cold, seemingly uncaring air of the hut. These weren't grand theological pronouncements or elaborate liturgies, but the raw, earnest pleas of people clinging to life by a slender thread. A prayer for the bitter wind to lessen its relentless assault. A prayer for the children, curled up and perhaps shivering even in the shared embrace, to be spared the cough that could so easily turn deadly in such conditions. A prayer for the meager store of food to last, for protection from the unseen spirits believed to ride the winter gales, and simply for the strength to see the pale, weak sun rise once more. A quiet, heartfelt appeal for mercy, for another dawn, for the safety of those pressed close beside you in the fragile shelter of your home. Those unseen spirits, the ones you prayed for protection against, weren't just formless anxieties whispered on the wind. In the deep, profound darkness of a medieval winter, a darkness almost unimaginable to us now, they took on shapes and purposes in the collective mind. The night itself felt like a presence, thick and heavy, pressing against the thin walls of your hut, and with it came the stories, the folklore that stitched the long hours together with threads of fear and wonder. Imagine the faint, smoky light of the central hearth, the only real illumination against the oppressive black, casting dancing shadows that writhed like phantoms on the rough-hewn timbers. Here, tales would unfold, passed down through generations. Stories of mischievous sprites, perhaps a puck-like figure from local lore, delighting in leading the unwary astray in the frozen fens with a flickering, deceptive light that promised warmth but delivered only disorientation. Or more sorrowful tales might be shared, of restless spirits bound to familiar places, their mournful cries perhaps mistaken for the wind's ceaseless lament through the ill-fitting shutters. Some believed in household guardians, beings who, if treated with respect, and perhaps a small offering of precious milk or a crust of bread left by the dying embers, might offer a touch of protection, or even lend a subtle hand with unseen chores. But neglect them, or worse, offend these unseen residents, and the consequences could range from inconveniently soured cream to far more unsettling disturbances that preyed on the mind. These beliefs weren't mere entertainment. They were the fabric of understanding for a world full of unexplained sounds. The sudden, sharp crack of freezing wood, the almost silent skittering of unseen creatures in the thatch above, the mournful sigh of the wind as it found its way through a poorly sealed window. Each noise could be an omen, a message, or the subtle passing of something not quite of this world, adding a different kind of chill to the air, a sense that the veil between worlds was at its very thinnest on these long, dark nights. Yet, amidst those spectral whispers and the deep, biting cold that seemed to seep through the very walls, another presence made itself known, something far more tangible, and in its own way, just as powerful against the gloom. It was the subtle, undeniable warmth of shared breath, the reassuring pressure of another body huddled close against the unforgiving chill. Imagine, if you will, the small, dark interior of your hut, a space barely larger than a modern room. The last embers of the central fire glow faintly, a pinprick of orange in the deep black, painting fleeting, ghostly highlights on the faces of your family, all packed together on a communal straw bed that rustles softly with every movement. The air is thick, a complex tapestry of smells, old wood smoke clinging to everything, damp earth beneath the floor rushes, and the undeniable, intimate scent of unwashed humanity, a familiar, almost grounding aroma in this enclosed, firelit world. There are no grand declarations of love, or overt reassurances whispered in the dark here, not in words anyway. Instead, comfort is an unspoken language, woven into the shared experience of survival. It's in the unconscious shifting of limbs to distribute warmth or make a little more room. The way a child, small and vulnerable, might burrow deeper against a parent's side, seeking that animal comfort. It's in the rhythmic, if sometimes shallow, sound of sleeping breaths that fill the tiny space. A collective sigh that signals, for this moment at least, all is well enough. This silent collective will to endure, to simply make it through another frozen endless night, created a profound, unspoken bond. Each shared exhalation into the frigid air was a quiet act of defiance, a testament to their resilience against the harsh indifference of the world, just beyond those thin wattle and daub walls. This was a different kind of magic, perhaps, the simple, profound magic of sticking together when the world felt determined to pull everything apart, finding solace not in spells, but in each other. Even with bodies huddled close, the deep chill of a medieval winter night was a persistent, gnawing thing. It clung to the edges of awareness, a constant reminder of the world outside those fragile walls. And so, as sleep finally began to claim them, lulled by the rhythmic breathing of others, their minds, perhaps, sought refuge. Thoughts would begin to unspool, weaving tapestries of warmth against the cold, dark canvas of the night, a silent, personal rebellion against the frost. Perhaps in those deepest hours, when the fire had dwindled to mere embers glowing faintly in the hearth, their minds would drift. They wouldn't be consciously replaying the day's struggle, the ache in their backs, or the monotonous taste of watery stew. Instead, a different world would bloom behind their eyelids, unbidden yet welcome. A world painted in the vibrant greens of new shoots pushing through damp, dark earth. The impossible, hopeful yellow of the first primroses clinging to a sun-warmed bank. They might almost feel the sun, a gentle, forgotten caress on skin no longer chapped raw by frost. Or hear the distant, joyful trill of a skylark ascending into a clear blue sky, a sound so different from the mournful howl of the winter wind. The scent of wet soil, rich and promising life, might fill their imagined air, a stark and beautiful contrast to the lingering indoor smell of wood smoke, damp wool, and unwashed bodies. Dreams of lambs, unsteady on new legs, or the lazy, contented drone of the first bees of the season, fat and fuzzy, exploring early, delicate blossoms. These weren't just idle fancies, these brief mental escapes. In a world where survival was a daily, often desperate struggle, these fleeting visions of spring were a vital sustenance for the soul. They were a tiny, fiercely guarded candle flame of hope, flickering stubbornly in the oppressive darkness of the long, hard winter. A promise, whispered by the sleeping mind, that the ice would not last forever, that warmth and light and life would, eventually, return to the weary land. And then, after what feels like an eternity huddled in the frozen, silent dark, something almost imperceptibly begins to change. It's not a sudden illumination, nothing so dramatic for a world lit only by fire and the distant, uncaring heavens. Instead, it's a whisper of a shift, a subtle dilution of the deepest, inky black that has pressed in upon you for so many hours. Imagine you're curled there, beneath a rough, threadbare blanket, the straw of your mattress rustling softly with every tiny, involuntary movement. A faint, earthy smell mingling with the pervasive chill. The air inside your small, shared hut still bites at any exposed skin, sharp and unforgiving. Your own breath still hangs before your face, a ghostly white plume in the frigid atmosphere, a fleeting testament to the stubborn life within you. But over by the crude wooden shutter, ill-fitting and letting in drafts that snake like icy fingers across the packed dirt floor, or perhaps through the tiny chinks in the daubed wattle wall where the relentless winter winds have worked their slow mischief. The impenetrable darkness seems to yield, just a fraction. It's the faintest, most delicate wash of pearlescent gray, a barely there lightening, almost indistinguishable at first from the lingering, heavy shadows themselves. This isn't warmth, not yet. The profound, bone-deep cold still clings with a familiar, aching intensity, a constant companion through these harsh, unforgiving months. But it is a message, a silent signal carried on the frozen, still air. The long, oppressive vigil of the night is slowly, inevitably, drawing to its close. The day, with all its relentless demands and often meager rewards, is stirring in the vast, cold world just beyond your fragile walls. That subtle shift, that almost imperceptible dilution of the night, continues its slow, patient work. The deepest black, the kind that felt like a heavy, suffocating blanket, has begun to retreat, pulling back from the edges of the world. Through the tiny gaps in your woven wattle wall, or perhaps the single unglazed window shuttered with wood, or even just a thick, greasy cloth, you'd notice the darkness outside is no longer absolute, no longer impenetrable. It's as if the world is being sketched anew, first in shades of charcoal, then in washes of diluted, gray ink. The edges of the familiar, the low, snow-dusted thatch of a neighbor's hovel, perhaps, or the gaunt skeletal branches of a dormant oak tree, begin to separate themselves from the gloom, their silhouettes sharpening against a sky that's grudgingly surrendering its inky cloak. This isn't the vibrant, joyful dawn of a summer's day, heralding warmth and abundance. Not at all. This is winter's hesitant offering, a pale, almost reluctant light, thin and watery, seeping across the frozen, silent landscape. It illuminates the thick frost that still crisps every surface, glinting dully on the hardened ruts of the path outside, making the world look as though it's been dusted with powdered bone. The air remains biting, a sharp intake if you were to venture out, and the light itself carries precious little comfort. It's more a stark reminder that the brief, huddled respite of darkness is over, and the chill, unending business of survival must soon resume, under a sky that offers light, but not yet solace. Inside the small, dim hut, the new light, though present, does little to dispel the deeper, more persistent cold that has become an unwelcome resident. You begin to stir, not with a sudden alertness, but with a slow, reluctant unfolding, like an old door creaking open on stiff hinges. Your limbs feel heavy, almost alien, like waterlogged wood retrieved from a frozen pond, and a profound stiffness has settled into every joint, locking them in place. Try to flex your fingers, and they respond grudgingly. the knuckles protesting with a dull, insistent ache. This isn't merely the sleepy stiffness born of a comfortable bed. This is the cold of the long, dark night, a chill that has worked its insidious way deep into your very marrow, clinging there with the tenacity of frost on the shadowed northern stone. The thin, scratchy wool of your blanket, perhaps shared with other shifting forms for precious huddled warmth, offers little true solace now against the pervasive chill. It likely feels damp, imbued with the cold exhalations of the night and the subtle, earthy scent of unwashed bodies and stale straw. You can feel that chill air, a constant unwelcome companion, on any small sliver of exposed skin. Your nose, your cheeks, your hands, if they've escaped their meager covering during the restless hours. It's a damp, penetrating cold, far removed from the crisp, clean chill of a modern winter morning. This cold feels ancient, personal, a weight upon your chest. Each breath you take might even taste of it, faintly metallic and sharp, mingling with the lingering aroma of wood smoke from a fire long since reduced to pale ashes. Moving is an act of deliberate, conscious effort, a slow creak and groan as your body reclaims itself from the night's icy grip, knowing that this feeling, this bone-deep weariness, is simply the prelude to another day spent coaxing life from a frozen world. The first conscious thought, even before your eyes fully adjust to the gloom, is of the hearth. It's the heart of this small, smoky world, and right now, its pulse is faint, almost gone. You might shuffle across the packed earth floor, bare feet protesting the chill, the air thick with the smell of stale smoke and something vaguely animal, the shared warmth of any livestock fortunate enough to be sheltered indoors, or just the general aroma of damp wool and unwashed bodies. At the hearth, a careful, almost reverent excavation begins. Beneath a blanket of gray ash, in the dim pre-dawn light, you hope to find a few stubborn, glowing coals. Sometimes they're there, winking like tiny, fiery eyes in the darkness, a small mercy. Other times, the night has claimed them entirely, and the tedious task of striking flint against steel in the frigid air awaits, fingers numb and clumsy. But let's imagine a spark remains. Tenderly, you'd feed it the driest scraps. A handful of twigs gathered yesterday, a twist of dried grass, a precious sliver of resinous wood. Leaning close, your breath a visible cloud in the cold, you coax it, willing it to life. There's a delicate dance, a patience, born of bitter experience. Too much air, the fragile ember dies. Too little, it suffocates. Then, a tiny flicker, a wisp of smoke that smells sharper, cleaner than cold ash. The kindling catches. A small, hopeful flame unfurls, casting dancing shadows on rough-hewn walls and the faces of anyone else stirring. Slowly, larger pieces of wood are added. The fire sighs, then crackles with confidence. The light grows, pushing back the dark, and a wave of genuine warmth, a physical comfort almost beyond words, begins to spread. This daily miracle is the true dawn, signaling that the day, with all its toil, can now properly begin, bringing with it the promise of a warm, if meager, morning meal. The fire crackles, a steady, reassuring rhythm now. That initial, desperate hunger for heat begins to subside, replaced by a more profound comfort. The small flames, no longer tentative, lick at the seasoned wood, painting the cramped interior with a warm orange glow. You can almost feel the tension ease from weary shoulders, a collective, unspoken sigh as the biting cold of the pre-dawn is held at bay, at least for now. This small victory, repeated morning after morning, is the bedrock of existence. A quiet sense of relief settles in, heavy and welcome as a thick blanket. Another harsh night survived. The shadows in the corners of the one-room dwelling soften, becoming less menacing, more familiar. Perhaps you stretch, feeling the warmth seep into your chilled bones, a sensation almost luxurious in its simplicity. The acrid smell of smoke, once a signal of struggle, is now a comfort, a sign of life, of safety. The sounds of the hut begin to change too. The rustle of straw, a quiet cough, the gentle clink of a wooden bowl as someone prepares for the meager morning meal. The new day, with its own long list of challenges and relentless chores, begins to stir outside. The wind might still moan a little around the wattle and daub walls, a reminder of the world's enduring indifference. But inside, for this brief interlude, there is a pocket of warmth, a moment of precious respite. The thought of the day's labor, perhaps tilling frozen earth, or tending to animals in the biting air, or fetching water from an icy stream, looms, yet it feels, for just a moment, manageable, because the night, the darkest, coldest part, has been overcome. Another small, essential triumph in a life often defined by them. Thank you for joining us on Plotful. Until our next story, may your thoughts be calm and your rest deep.